Yusuf Omar here from the Hindustan Times at a demonstration, a protest taking place in downtown Delhi against the killings that are taking place in Kashmir. I'm joined now by one of the organizers of this demonstration. Let's start out by your name and a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, I'm Kavita Krishnan. I'm a women's rights activist with the All India Progressive Women's Association. I'm also a communist activist with the CPIML Liberation.
Kavita, this part of Delhi is famous for protests, for activism, and there happens to be a lot of different groups that have converged here today. You guys had about 150, 200 people that have gathered for this protest. What specifically are you guys calling for?
Today you saw a variety of trade unions here, student groups, women's groups, civil liberties groups and so on. And we together wanted to say that as Indian citizens, we want to tell the Indian government to stop killing Kashmiri people in our name. If there are protests in Kashmir, if there are lakhs of people angry or mourning or sad in Kashmir, if they have a resentment, then the way to deal with it is not to use bullets to claim lives or to use pellet guns to take away the eyesight of Kashmiri people. We have to remember that Kashmir is not just a piece of land. There are actually people living there. And that primarily, contrary to the way in which it's projected in much of the media, unfortunately, Kashmir problem is not primarily a problem of terrorism. It is not primarily a Pakistan-inspired problem. It is primarily a political issue to do with how Kashmiri sentiment. And that cannot be addressed by bullets. You can't solve that problem at gunpoint. So we are here to call for a political dialogue with all sections of Kashmiri people and Kashmiri politics as well as Kashmiri people towards a political solution in Kashmir that can be in keeping, that emerges from dialogue with them and that is in keeping with the wishes of and the sense of respect and self-respect and dignity of the Kashmiri people.
Absolutely. There is a fair police presence here. Probably now in the later stages as many police as there are protesters, but it's been an all but peaceful event. There hasn't been any violence here today, but the events that have taken place in Kashmir have been anything but peaceful. They have been violent. Prime Minister Modi was criticized for having not responded quick enough, for having sent out birthday wishes when he hadn't addressed what was happening in Kashmir while he was on a trip to Africa.
Yes.
What was your feelings to government's responses? Do you think that they handled this well?
I think they handled it in a very wrong way, and not for the first time. The government, if the Modi government is handling it wrong now, the UPA Congress government also handled it in exactly the same way in 2010. And I want to say here that when we say violence, we cannot, put the onus of the violence on the Kashmiri protesters, because there have been even more violent protests in other parts of India. In Haryana recently during the Jat protests, for example, and the same measure or the same intensity or scale of paramilitary deployment in Haryana was certainly not seen. The same scale of killings of civilians was certainly not seen as it is being seen in Kashmir, as it has been seen on several occasions in Kashmir. So I feel that what is being called for by us is for a complete change in the template, in the way in which Kashmir is looked at and addressed. And we want to say that governments like to talk a lot about winning the hearts and minds of Kashmiri people, and you've had Prime Minister Narasimha Rao say we'll have talks with Kashmiri separatist groups and the sky is the limit about what we are willing to consider as a solution. Vajpayee, when he was Prime Minister from the BJP, he said that he was asked, will you talk only within the scope of the Indian Constitution? And he said, no, I'll talk within the scope of humanity. I want to say that you're saying those things, but what you're doing is forget the scope of humanity. It's the most inhumane, barbaric way in which you're using pellet guns to target the eyes of protesters. If I protest in Delhi here, I don't have pellet guns aimed at my eyes. I don't have bullets aimed at my chest.
Yeah.
And so there is a difference, and we have to change that. We can't say the sky is the limit when you, on certain occasions, but when a Kashmiri student wants to organize a small seminar or raise a slogan, then you say you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to express yourself. I think that we in India have to open our hearts and minds and tune our ears to what Kashmiri people are saying. And much of the Indian media is actually not allowing us to do that. So we will have to do it in spite of many of the
Kashmiri descent.
No.
A lot of the people here from Kashmir, or where do they represent?
No, there were some people here from Kashmir, of course, but most of us were not from Kashmir. And we felt that the point was for us to be saying not because we are Kashmiris, but because we are human beings, because because we care for due process being followed, and we care for justice, and we would like a just and politically respectful conduct towards the Kashmiri people.
A lot of Indians that we've spoken to and a lot of the narratives that we've seen in the media ends up polarizing this into a religious matter, with Islam and Muslims being at the very center of this conflict. I haven't seen any of that addressed in your posters, in your dialogue. You don't seem to be addressing that. Why is that?
You see, it is not. You see, if you look at the history of Kashmir, see, Kashmir is one of the only Indian states which is a Muslim majority state, all right? So the attitude of the Indian governments towards Kashmir has also been seen through a religious prism and so on. And that in a way has created the scope. When the Kashmir agitations initially began, they did not have an Islamic tenor. That happened with a steady Hinduization of the Indian political discourse. So after 1989, you found this Islamicization of Kashmiri protests as well. But even now, you can't see it primarily as a sort of Islamic, you can't say this is a problem of terrorism, as one of the prominent Indian channels is trying to say, we all have to be united against terror. That's a meaningless phrase when you talk about Kashmir, because you see, the Kashmir situation is not one of, they're not doing it because they're connected with the IS or whatever it is, all right? They are protesting because they have a grievance about their presence inside the Indian Union. They feel that they should have a right to self-determination. Now, suppose I put it to you that suppose my audience here, suppose you feel you don't agree. You feel that Kashmir is an integral part of India. A couple of Kashmiri students who spoke here said today that you're saying integral part of India, but why can't you then listen to a citizen of yours from Kashmir, whom you are saying is an Indian? But you are not dealing with their grievances and their protests in the same way as you deal with grievances and protests in Haryana. If Kashmiri people protest against rape, now I myself led anti-rape agitations here in Delhi, so I want to share one thing with the audience here. You remember how angry people in Delhi were because justice was not done within 1 month or 2 months or 3 months of a very horrendous gang rape and murder of a young woman in Delhi in 2012. Perfectly understandable. But imagine that an entire 2 villages, Kunan and Poshpora, the women of the entire villages were raped in Kashmir. And for 25 years since then, the matter has not been able to come to trial. The district magistrate there says, yes, I also feel that the rapes took place. But because the accused were of security forces, no justice was done, the whole matter was buried, and the matter has not yet been able to. The courts have not completely finished with it. They're still saying that maybe maybe due process should be done, a trial should happen. But I'm saying this at some length because I want to say that the grievances of the Kashmiri people are not coming, they're not Pakistani sponsored grievances. They're grievances created by the conduct of the Indian state towards the people of Kashmir in very large part. They are created by the history, a very complex history that I can't put here in a very short way, of Kashmir's accession to India. I would appeal to everybody here listening that if at all you think that we shouldn't be taking away the lives and eyesight of Kashmiri people in our name, then I would appeal that start reading up about Kashmir, not to understand why, not to reassure yourself that Kashmir is an integral part of India, but to try and understand, even if you don't agree, why Kashmiris, so many of them, feel otherwise.
Thank you so much. And there you hear it from one of the organizers of this demonstration. It's about understanding, about hearing the other sides of the story.
Yes.
The violence hasn't ended, and neither will this conversation. Continue to chat on the comments section. Let's try and keep it to a high level discussion, not descend into trolling. The organizers of this demonstration will be engaging with you guys in our comments. Share this video.